how would you rank the raid as far as Destiny's other raids? And what are your thoughts on the raid race? What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one. Definitely a top 3. I don't think I can contest that, you know? If it has to be really dragged around with regards to things in the narrative, maybe you sit there and look at a top 4. It's going to stand in that upper echelon for certain compared to other raid bosses like Oryx back in the day with King's Fall OG. It definitely stands toe-to-toe with bosses like Riven and Rulk, which I think it's fair to say they are now the sort of the pinnacle of raid bosses with regards to their design and the way they introduce themselves. And I still think that Vow is the best for me. I can't get over Rulk. He's just too good.
That's very high.
He was
for me.
a brilliant. It's a very high bar, especially considering that Rulk was a character that was introduced only briefly, and yet left such an incredibly lasting presence on the game and the entirety of the Dread faction as a whole. But man, the Salvation's Edge is still killer. I mean, from a encounter design perspective, it's kind of weird that it only has 2 bosses, but the difficulty curve of it and the things you're expected to do with it, fantastic. The actual encounters that were designed for the raid, with the exception of Encounter 3, because I think that one is kind of a bit too easy for this tier of raid, absolutely stellar, absolutely incredible. Verity, in particular, Encounter 4.
Yeah.
Wow, what a brilliant idea to sit there and have. Yeah, the most unique encounter we've seen since probably, I think the consensus is that it was Vault in Last Wish. That's the last thing we've seen which is similar to this. But it's Vault on steroids. And the fact that it took 11 hours for the first team to crack it, I think, that's really, I mean, that speaks for itself. This was one of the most incredible encounters to go through because it's a fusion of tough gameplay, amazing mechanics, and this absolutely brilliant narrative twist where you are literally explaining the entire story of the final shape in the most broad brush terms using shapes. And it's just mind-boggling that they made all this. And you know what's amazing? Verity apparently was the result of the delay. Like they had Verity is one of the things that was listed that they made within the delayed time window for everything. And I can't imagine Salvation's Edge without Verity. Like, if Verity didn't exist, it would be a much less exciting raid. You know, if we just, I mean, think about that, right? Because it's clear that it's just added on quickly. You could go directly from the end of Encounter 3 all the way up to Encounter 4, and I don't think it would be anywhere near as exciting. But man,
it's a break. It gives a nice palate cleanser, and the fact it's white, you know, can hurt your eyes a bit, but it's just a very different puzzle encounter, and just mechanics wise, how, you know, having like killing off the Guardian and then having to try and spectate and call out ghosts and outfits, like it's easily the most unique raid encounter ever made, and just with the shapes as well, very, you know, looks a lot more complicated than it is complicated, but it is definitely difficult to describe. I think if you watch any kind of guide or explainer of it, it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. But once you actually do it a few times, in gameplay wise, it just flows so well, and it's just such a nice. And again, you also have the element of being alone in the room, which is very cleverly done. The fact that you're just, I don't think there's any other raid encounters where you're just kind of separating, you're in your own separate instance, is also very cleverly done. But I think I'm not sure where I would rank it personally. I think Riven and Rulk would be safe top 2s. Then Vault of Glass, Wrath. I feel like it would be around somewhere in the middle, high middle, but middle for me. I mean, I thought if I can, you know, I'm going to be a backseat developer and just completely, you know, probably make a lot of, if any Bungie designers are watching, eye roll. But I do think some of the encounters were kind of duplicated. I feel like the first encounter we could do without with, because a lot of them with the bouncing back and forth of the plates, they're quite similar. This is just my personal, again, we can throw my opinion out there. Just my personal, what I would have loved to have seen would be just multiple different versions of the Witness all throughout. I feel like the Herald boss, as much as I do love the Herald encounter, I feel like I would have preferred just, even if it was like a hand of the witness or something to do with the witness rather than a taken captain. Like I would have loved to have seen just a raid where it's just 4 different encounters of just the witness, and you're just constantly fighting off different pieces until you finally reach the top bit and you face him like ultimately. But I feel like I really did enjoy the Herald encounter, which I believe is the second, and the third encounter, which is the more linear path. That was very cool. But I think the first encounter, I guess it teaches you the mechanics, but I would have liked to see, I guess, more bosses. But then I get the idea of you want the main boss to be the witness and you don't want to have a bunch of other distractions. But I would have liked to have seen multiple varieties of the witness just all throughout. Just no one else. Like, this is just you against the witness, and you're just constantly it's such a big enemy. It requires you to defeat it like 3 or 4 times. And then obviously his excision after that as well. But that's just my nitpicking and just what I would have liked to see. But it's still excellent raid.
I will say this is something which I need to really hash this out before true confirmation, because there have been some Bungie devs that I've heard that have said no, this isn't the case, and yet it is observable in the game that it surely is. The idea of whether or not the witness is the whole monolith or not.
Yes.
That is, assuming that's true, because I'm going to go by what's observable in game, because I can't 100% confirm everything. Assuming that is correct, that is the most brilliant and wild gameplay decision with regards to the environment, and it's absolutely fantastic. The other thing I'd say as well is, here's a little rumor that I've heard, so none of this is confirmed. I heard a rumor that apparently when they were developing Root of Nightmares, they realized that the raid needed a big encounter that was just better than what they currently had. And they did not have the ability to flesh something out in that time. So they took planets from what was meant to be Salvation's Edge,
right,
and switched it with the encounter 3 of Root of Nightmares. In terms of structure. Now, obviously, if you look at the two of them side by side, they both look like they're parts of that respective raid. So I don't know how much credence and truth there is to that.
Maybe it's the mechanics.
But yeah, just for a second, imagine what it would have been like if Encounter 3 had been in Root of Nightmares had been an Encounter 3 version of what we got in Salvation's Edge, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You know, can you imagine going and having that 3-boss series where all of a sudden it's, we go ahead and we do the opening encounter, and then we do Herald, and then we do Planets, and then we do Verity, and then we do Witness? What a raid. That would have been incredible. I think it would have genuinely been the toughest raid that has ever been created if that had been the format they'd gone for. But also I think it would have been something that followed up after Root of Nightmares, which would then have been probably cleared on day 1 within an hour. Because, I mean, when Math Class got to Encounter 3 in Salvation's Edge, they cleared it first try. I mean, that's what you're looking at when it comes to these contest teams now. They're just really, really good at it.
Yeah, I mean,
I will say this. With regards to what you said about Encounter 1, I think Encounter 1 is fine. And I say that because it's got the kind of combat intensity that Encounter 3 in Vow of the Disciple has, where you're going through the relics, and you need to learn that base mechanic for it. And I'm okay with that. I do completely agree with you on the idea of the Herald of Finality. I wish there was more to it. I'd even have accepted it if it wasn't just the Herald of Finality, but instead was the Last Disciple or something, you know? Like, make it so that it's a known character within the backstory and lore. Maybe not super known. I know everyone thinks that it's Tanix, but I would have loved it if they'd sat there and called it Chelchis, the Final Disciple or something.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other theory that people have rolling around, and it's got very deep lore bases to it. They could have done a lot with that. So much awesome stuff, but yeah, either have that be something that's more meaningful to the Witness, or have it actually be a part of the Witness. Like, in fact, you know, my own backseat dev moment, you know, the bit in the cutscene where the Vanguard is running from the Witness at the end of the campaign? Crow has that moment where he cuts the Witness's hand using the iron axe. Can you imagine if that's essentially what we have to do in Encounter 2, is instead of just fighting the Herald, is fighting the Herald so that you can steal a weapon the Herald has, be it a glaive or something, because the Disciples have a thing for glaives, and then using that to actually cut off the weakened hand.
Yeah, like that's the kind of thing that I mean.
So
like
many cool things.
It wouldn't have to be just a whole separate witness, but if it's just an encounter and it was just this cloud and there's just hundreds of hands that are reaching down and you have to chop them all off and you're kind of weakening. The theme is that you're rising through the monolith, you're chopping off these hands and you're weakening it. But just something along those lines of just where I just didn't want to see anyone else besides the witness, and I wanted to just face lots of different forms and versions, because the witness can kind of shapeshift, and it is just this weird giant structure which we can't even really understand. But yeah, the raid was, by all means, it was technically the most difficult raid ever, which is good. I wanted to see that. It deserves to be. Like, if you know, if it was as
one
easy
team
as
cleared on day one.
If it was as easy as Root of Nightmares, Nezarec, that would have been, because that was just so easy. But they did that deliberately. They wanted to. But the fact that being difficult, I think, is very satisfying. And